lives according to certain precepts, practices, and principles in order for us to have healthy relationships and be viable and relevant. In order for you and I to have a kind of lifestyle that remains relevant and healthy, there's certain principles and precepts that must permeate our existence, that must be the standards on which we live by, that must move throughout our entire being, not only in some certain compartment, but they must adhere, that our lives must adhere to a certain way of living, a certain style, a certain standard, a certain guideline. And just like many of those companies that are going to come to us soon to a demise, many of us are not able to live the potential that we have. Because of the practices, precepts, and standards that we are living by, rather than having Christ as our standard. You see, we have to make room for Christ.
Tell it.
Because you see, he doesn't come in just busting down doors. He doesn't just come in and take over. What he desires for us to do is to make room for him. To rule and reign. In other words, it has to be something that we voluntarily do and say that I'm going to make room for Christ in my entire life. That he will have rule and reign over the way I think, the way I manage my money, the way I manage relationships, that I will not just compartmentalize Christ, but I'm going to make room for him. See, when Pam and I decided that we was going to get married, dating was one thing. Courting was one thing. Marriage is a whole different ball of wax. Right? And when we made the decision that we were going to get married, we had to make room for one another in our lives. Because, see, we had become accustomed to living our lives. And now, in order for us to have healthy relationship, we had to make room for one another. We had to make room for one another emotionally, because when we are apart, we just think about ourselves. But in order to come together in marriage, we had to make room emotionally for one another. So therefore, my emotions could not only be concerned about me, but now they had to be concerned about her as well. So we had to make room for one another. Spiritually, we had to make room. No longer could I just only be concerned about me spiritually, but I had to be concerned about her spiritually. She had to not only be concerned about her spirituality, but also be concerned about my spirituality. Because we had to make room for one another. And this was probably the greatest challenge of us making room, was making room physically. Because Pam was used to her own space. And let me see how I can say it. So that it's safe. So it's safe. So it's safe to go home. See, when we got married, She lived in a townhouse. I live in an apartment. So it was really a no-brainer that we were going to reside in the townhouse. But Pam was used to living with Pam.
The whole townhouse.
Right. So she owned all the closets. they were her closets. Right? They belong to her. So they're her closets. She can do whatever she chooses to do with those closets. She can have as many clothes in those closets as she wants to, because they're her closets.
All right.
But now, since we're coming together to be married and we're going to reside in her home, she had to start making room. Right? It's one thing to court and date. You go back to your place, I stay at my place. But it's another thing when you have to start rearranging and start creating space. So she had to start shifting clothes. Because I needed space. I didn't need as much space as she needed. But I needed space. So she carved out a little corner in a closet. I'm being facetious. She said, your 3 hangers can go right here. And as long as... And make sure that you always have on a pair of shoes, because only 2 pair of shoes can fit here. No, I'm just playing. But what she did is what we have to do with our lives. Is you have to start making space. Christ wants us to make space for him, to make room for him, to allow him to go to work with us. I mean, now some of us, we don't take Jesus to work. Because if I took him to work, then he'd see some of the emails that I sent. But what Christ wants us to do is make room for him. Allow him to have residence in every area of our life. The people in Jerusalem and in Judea, they had it wrong, because here they had read about him and knew that he would soon come, and they were anticipating him, but no one would make room for him.
Yeah.
Because as Luke tells us that Rome, which was the world power, decided that a census needed to be taken, because Rome needed to know how many people live in the region that we rule, so that they could devise a tax plan for them to make money off of the people who live in the region that they rule. So the emperor says that we need to take a census. Everyone has to go back to their hometown, check in, so that we can find out what the population is like and how many people reside in this region, and so that we can devise a tax plan that is to our benefit. And Luke tells us that Joseph and Mary went to their hometown, and Joseph checks in as he's supposed to, and as they are trying to find a place to stay, no one would open their home to a pregnant woman who needed place to stay. Here is, and what we have to understand about them, this is the religious folk. These are the people who are anticipating the Messiah's arrival.
Yeah.
These are the people who are looking for him to come, and yet they're not willing to open up their home, or not even the local innkeeper was willing to allow them to stay on a floor somewhere, just so this pregnant woman and her soon-to-be husband would have a place to reside while the census is being taken.
Yeah.
There was no room.
Yeah.
Some translations will say there was no room in the inn.
Yeah.
That out of all of the people in the town, no one would make room for a pregnant woman who's carrying the Messiah, and no one would make room. Therefore, he has to be born in a cave, in a manger, in a stable, in a lowly place, because everyone didn't have room for this pregnant woman and her soon-to-be husband to rest for the night. So how is it then that we make room for him? How is it that we allow Christ to permeate every aspect of our lives? Well, here we see in this encounter some interesting principles that if we could embrace them, we'll make room for him in our lives. Here's the first one. The first one kind of threw me. But I think it's apropos for the life in which we live, in the society that we live in. In order to make room for Christ, we have to monitor our busyness.
Yep.
Now, I didn't say our business. Our busyness. We have to monitor how busy we get until we've crowded him out.
All right.
Let's look at it. It's right here in verses 1 through 7, because it's interesting. Luke says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. Now, this was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born. And she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. Here it is, Luke reminds his readers that there is a decree that comes out from Caesar Augustus that says that a census needs to be taken of the entire region in which Rome rules, because Rome has defeated every world power, and Rome is now the world power. They are in charge of that entire region, and Caesar says that we need to take a census and find out what the population is like so that we can have the appropriate tax plan put together so that we get rich off the people. In the midst of that, Joseph, Luke tells us, goes from Nazareth to Bethlehem, to the town of David, because that's where Joseph's home people were from. That's where his people were from. That's his hometown. And he goes there with Mary, who's pledged to be married to him, and she's expecting. And can you imagine they're going from house to house, trying to find, because during that time, everyone in that region would have to scurry and hurry back